Pop quiz. When was the last time a defending champion was beaten at the CrossFit Games? Or a more important question, when's the next time? In 2017, Clair Toomey won her first CrossFit Games, beating the defending champion Catherine David's daughter, who finished in 5th place. And that was the last time a defending champion was beaten in the elite individual field at the CrossFit Games. And it won't be happening again this year, at least not in the women's field, because we know that Tia is not competing. So potentially we could have a returning champion if Annie or Catherine are able to win the games, but more likely we are going to have a new first-time CrossFit Games champion, at least in the women's field. In 2016, Matt Fraser beat Ben Smith, the then defending champion, to win his first CrossFit Games, and that was the last time a defending champion was beaten in the men's field. And unlike the women's field, we've already had the passing of the torch, with Matt Fraser retiring and Justin Medeiros stepping up to win not 1 but 2 CrossFit Games. So that means in 6 years we have not had a defending champion beaten, and that's 7 years if we're just looking at the men's field. Now I realise at this point I am ignoring the adaptive division and the various age groups, and that's just because they're quite new divisions, or the nature of age groups means that people are moving divisions more often. I promise I have nothing against these divisions. But let's go back to the elite individuals. So looking at the women's field, every year the question would be, can anyone beat Clair Toomey? Some people would say yes, they were proven wrong, but we have to believe that everyone can be beaten. Although this year, Tia cannot be beaten, because she's not competing. Of course, the same cannot be said for Justin Medeiros. He is competing, and therefore, theoretically, he can be beaten. Now, while it's true that Justin's already won the CrossFit Games twice, this is going to be the year where we'll see exactly the kind of champion he is, because we already know the kind of champion he isn't. If we look back at the history of the CrossFit Games, in the early years, every year we would see a new CrossFit Games champion. And then came along 2011 and won Mr. Richard Froning Jr., who not only won the 2011 CrossFit Games, but went on to win the following 3 years as well, giving him an impressive 4 CrossFit Games victories until he moved over to the team competition, where he has then racked up an additional 6, meaning he has stood on top of the podium 10 times in his career, 4 as an individual and 6 times on a team. So before Froning, we had never seen that kind of win streak for an individual athlete at the CrossFit Games. And while Rich was never beaten, he did stop competing as an individual and move to the team competition, which meant in 2015 there was an opening for a new CrossFit Games champion, much like we're seeing in the women's field this year. And 2015 was the best year for Ben Smith, and maybe for Matt Fraser too, because Ben Smith beat Matt Fraser and won the CrossFit Games. Matt came second, receiving that silver medal that lit a fire under him and was definitely something he never wanted to get again. Unfortunately for Ben, much like my open workouts, it was one and done. The following year he came second and Matt Fraser won the CrossFit Games, his first but not his last. He would go on to win a total of 5 CrossFit Games, giving him the record for the most individual wins at the time. He then retired undefeated. So we had Rich Froning winning 4 and moving on to teams, that 1 year where Ben Smith won, and then we had Matt Fraser winning 5. Jump to 2021, the first CrossFit Games that Matt Fraser would not be competing in as an individual athlete. So who would step up and take the crown as the new CrossFit Games champion? Well, it was the man with the mullet, Justin Medeiros. So Justin claimed a victory, but not a victory over the former champion. So jump to 2022, and Justin Medeiros now has to defend his title as the fittest on earth. Would we see another Ben Smith with just 1 win and then it going to someone else? Was this going to be a return to the early years of CrossFit where we would have a new champion every year? So while at the time maybe the biggest stories were Clair Toomey going for her 6th individual win that would give her the most individual wins in CrossFit Games history, or looking over at the teams and seeing if Rich would win, which would then give him that 10th victory at the CrossFit Games. But despite all of that, the men's competition was still something exciting to watch. Would Justin Medeiros be able to win the games yet again? Especially when we consider we had people like Roman Krennikov and Ricky Garrard there to challenge him for the title. But despite their best efforts, he pulled it off. Justin was able to defend his title, win it once again. Unlike Ben Smith, he was not handing it over to somebody else. But what about this year? Why should we care? Because Justin can be beaten. We have to believe that. We have to believe that everyone can be beaten. But just because something can happen doesn't mean it will happen. So currently Justin actually sits in good company. If we look back at the women's field, we'll see that Annie Forsdottir had 2 CrossFit Games wins in 2011 and 2012, and then Catherine Davidsdottir won 2015 and 2016. And maybe that's the one we should be paying attention to, because after those 2 wins, well, she was beaten. Who was she beaten by? Clair Toomey, who took the title and ran with it. So what does that mean for Justin? Well, if he's able to win the CrossFit Games again this year, that elevates him above the likes of Annie and Catherine and starts to put him into that category of Rich Froning and Matt Fraser. He is the odds-on favourite to win if he is competing at the CrossFit Games, and could it be that he will keep winning until he's decided he's had enough? On the other hand, if someone is able to beat him, would that be the same as Tia beating Catherine? The level of fitness needed to beat Justin at the CrossFit Games, is that the mark of someone who is going to be a champion for many years to come? Could we see the start of a new legacy? So while no doubt when the Games rolls around, probably the most noise and speculation we're going to hear is on the women's field. Who is going to win now that Clair Toomey has left the door open for a new CrossFit Games champion? Or even looking over to the team competition. Now that Rich Froning is not competing, will we still see a mayhem team on top of the podium? But let's not sleep on what's happening on the men's field, because whether Justin wins or if somebody dethrones him, that could be a huge indication of what we should expect to see in the coming years.